All right, Paul, we are live on Facebook.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Happy Sunday, and welcome to another artist conversation with the Otherworldly Arts Collective. And tonight we have Paul Rucker. And, I haven't been doing this so much, but this is the beer that I had for Paul. So this is my beer contribution to you. Happy Sunday, sir. And then for those of you, for those of the people that are out there that don't know who you are, would you just give an introduction and talk about what kind of artist you are?
Yes, I will. And in fact, okay, so I'm a metaphysical figurative artist. That's how I lead into my elevator speech. Figurative or figural means that my work is primarily based around the human figure. I mean, it's not completely limited to that, but that's kind of the foundation. Metaphysical is kind of like a way of saying mythological, spiritual, archetypal. So what that translates into is the bulk of my work is interpretations of gods, goddesses, personifications, spirits, archetypes, things like that, largely through the medium of the human figure. Kind of like the imagery that we're seeing behind us. We're not in my studio right now. We're in my computer room, which I've kind of rigged up a little bit to show some originals. So the large painting that's on the far wall there is my interpretation of the Greek god Dionysus from about 20 years ago.
Okay. Can you, just for people who may not be up on their gods, which god was that?
The god of wine, madness, theater, and ecstasy.
Okay.
So, oh, and also of ritual. So you can't probably see these details in this, but there's several different kinds of rituals. So like the god himself is inviting you to come into him, because the idea of being the worship of Dionysus was about being able to actually get into the body and the spirit of the god. So he's not out there. It's like if you get intoxicated with the god, you are in the body of the god, and you can go to ecstatic madness right along with him. So on the okay, I'm trying to figure out my right and my left. I guess it would be the viewer's left here. The mask that you see with the horns on there, he's also the god of actors, because
Ah,
acting, yeah, the first plays were based on rituals to Dionysus. And
okay.
so the figures that are on either side of his hips, basically, those are shamans, because that's
Okay.
another form of Dionysian ecstasy, to go outside of yourself in the persona of a magical shaman. You can't really see it too well, but down there at the bottom of the canvas, later on, when you go to the website and you pop up a bigger image, we'll be able to see this. There's an actor wearing the mask, and that's indication that he is personifying the god to the extent that he is actually representing him, what in modern paganism we call drawing down. And there's a couple of Maenads, wild women, dancing up in the corner up there. So I just mentioned that's another thing. I am a pagan. I come from a pagan polytheistic point of view. So that's not just the imagery of what my art deals with, but also kind of the spiritual walk that I'm doing in this life.
Mhm.
And it started, I should go back to this because you asked me this in an earlier conversation, where my art started.
Yeah.
It started before I was even able to talk. I was born hearing impaired as the result of an accident at birth. And my parents didn't really figure out what was going on until I was around 3 years old. But in before that, and even after it, I was having all kinds of visionary experiences. I mean, stuff that was, the way that I usually like to describe it is it was as different from ordinary reality as in the movie The Wizard of Oz, how the Technicolor sections are different from the stuff that's set in Kansas, where it's all sepia tones, So I was having these powerful visionary experiences, and I wanted to bring something back into this world. So I basically started creating art compulsively, and I didn't really I mean, my art kind of started out looking the way everybody's does with stick figures and stuff. I don't know if I still have it, but I have like this picture from 7 years old where it's like a purple lady by a river, and she's got fingers. So that was like my big innovation on that particular one, is adding fingers to the hands. But the inner vision, the fiery vision was always there, because I was having these dreams in night when I was sleeping. And also sometimes it would be like, I'd be off in my little deaf world basically, and having a kind of a visionary escapade that would be hard to explain, because it's like a distance of so many years, but I would very easily go off into trance states where I would have these conversations with beings that I now interpret as gods, spirits, elementals, or whatever. So that's why I made art in the first place, because I was creating a kind of a talisman to bring back into the ordinary world, and B, why it has that emphasis. It's always about these beings who are essentially personifications of the mysteries of the nature that surrounds us.
It's pretty awesome. I mean, like, it's really hard to like, I don't know everything about deaf culture and everything, but like the little bit that I know of is that like it can be very much like a completely different language, like from what like we would know compared to like what somebody else there. So when you say like your own deaf little world, and
Mhm.
like you probably have like all different sorts of senses that were existing that like we may never see or know.
It heightens the visual,
Yeah.
because I know that if I'd been born with normal hearing, I probably would have gone more into music, because my father's family was very musical. Both my father and his sister, my aunt, were professional musicians, singers and instrumentalists. And in fact, my aunt, when she was alive, was a doctor of music in piano and voice. Um, but I don't know. When I was when I was around 9 years old, I started studying about parapsychology, ESP, and things like that. And that kind of study kind of led gradually into just metaphysics in general, where you're trying to get a sense of the esoteric reasoning behind things. So I learned about stuff like reincarnation and karma and so on. And I started meditating, why was I born, not deaf exactly, but with a pretty severe hearing impairment. If I took my hearing aids out right now, I wouldn't be able to hear you. I have to have the augmentation really. Why, it's like, so that was interesting in itself, because when I first learned about the concept of karma, I was like, it's a punishment for things that you do. And I was like, oh my God, what could I have done to be punished like this? It took me many years of just kind of living with it and seeing how it plays out, sort of studying how it plays out in real life, that no, sometimes, at least according to this line of thinking, people set up particular conditions that they're going to experience in a life that they're going to have in order to learn or do things that are very specific. And I'm like, I think this is not a punishment. I think this is something that I did in order to pursue a path as a visual artist,
Yeah.
because I have some kind of a connection going on with, whatever is out there, archetypes or divinities, or the autonomous imagination of the culture, whatever it is. I have a capacity to be able to put things into a form that people respond to. And that's actually a good segue into one of my primary ways of making money and spreading my imagery around. I do a lot of reproductions of my artwork. I've been doing this since 1995. So we're talking about 25 years now. I make prints, greeting cards, and now magnets, and probably down the future, I'll make other kinds of reproductions too. But since 1995, I've gone on the road. I've done road trips in different areas of the country and literally stopped in at metaphysical stores, because every state in the Union has metaphysical stores, usually in the big cities, but not always. I've stopped in, and a lot of times I've done cold sales because I've got this down. I've got this down really nicely, actually. I have presentation books. So that's a thing I learned early on. I had a mentor who taught me about that. Presentation books are where you have examples of everything that you're selling. So I've got one that's for the prints that shows the exact prints, and it shows the descriptions that I have for them. Because in circumstances like this, I'm a really big believer that the sizzle sells the steak, regardless of what your steak is. But in this particular case, because we're talking metaphysical stores, we're talking places where people are seekers that go because they want to learn more about metaphysical ideas, about interacting with the world, the universe. They're open spiritually. So I'm selling the store owners these prints that have descriptions. So like if I'm interpreting a divinity like this one, I've got a description of what my take is on the back, and most of the imagery that I sell has some kind of verbal description to go with it. It's the story that goes along with it, because I think you need that. And I'm gonna just go out on a limb and say, I think you need that even if even if you think you make art or crafts that are self-explanatory, having a description like, okay, let's say you're a person who's selling grandma's formulas for soap. If you have a little tag on the soap that says, this is the story of grandma and her special soap recipe, it imbues the soap with meaning. It's not just soap. It's become grandma's special soap. Here's the backstory to it. I'm a very big believer on that because a lot of times visual artists and craftspeople who are really, really invested in the visual, they tend to forget that because we're in such a verbal dominant culture, the words, the text, the story, often, it's surprisingly enough, oftentimes it gives people a lead in to the experience of the visual. Like they could see, the artwork in a show, but what they'll often see is just the superficial, like they go, oh, wow, it's got a lot of blue, or, oh, I like this figure or whatever. But if they get a little text, like a description that's next to it, they read it, and then they step back again, and they have a deeper experience going on with it. They would have the same if they had an opportunity to talk with an artist about what was going on in it. So anyway, I've been going on these trips to visit the metaphysical stores. And so this is my way of bypassing the distribution network, because there are distributors for this kind of thing, but they take a big cut. Yeah. And B, it's been a tax deductible way to see the country. So I've seen every state in the lower 48 except for Vermont, and I've been able to write off the expenses of doing it if I make this the primary purpose of doing that. Yes,
So, wait, let me stop you for just a second. So how did you get this idea to visit every metaphysical store and go across the country? I mean, like, that's really brave. That's really brave to be like, I need to go and get my artwork as far as I can,
Well, I'm going to go back a long way. I'm going to go back further, because I actually started doing this in earnest in 1995, but I'm going to bump the clock back a little bit to, let's say 1992. Okay. I was living in San Francisco at the time. I had just ended a very destructive, abusive relationship, and I just graduated college. I used the last of the money that I had to get back to Minneapolis, where I found shelter with some friends. And I spent a year or so healing. And that was the most creatively deactivated time of my entire life. I was so wounded that I couldn't make new art, but I did have a series of artworks that I had created for a self-guided class that was kind of almost exactly the same thing. It was interpretations of gods from different cultures, plus papers that went with them. So at about that time, the first color copying process came out. And back then it was really high end. It was expensive, but it was high end. And what I noticed was you can make a color copy from these things because they were small enough to put on a scanner bed that looked almost like a high-end print. So my very first experiment with making reproductions of my artwork to sell was getting like 4-ups. I had a friend at Kinko's, because it was Kinko's back then, who allowed me to print 4-ups of the same thing for the price of one.
Nice.
And there was a place called Paper Depot downtown that actually sold really beautiful cardstocks and envelopes to match. So I was able back then to get colors that matched, or that went with it. So what I did was I literally hand glued these hand trimmed copies and put them with matching envelopes and put them in little cello bags. And I had a friend, Roger Williamson, who is the originator and emeritus past owner of Magus Books, because he started his business in 1992. In I think it was 1993, he started carrying my cards on consignment, and they sold so well. I'm like, oh my God, I've got something here. And at that time, that was water in the desert, because I was so low owing to this destructive thing that I'd lived through and gotten away from, that this was just really, really encouraging. So a year later, somebody I knew turned me on to a company called Modern Postcard. So Modern Postcard made it possible to get postcards of one size, and then they had another size that was deluxe, for a price where it actually made sense for me to buy them, and then I could do a wholesale and a retail markup. You had to get 500 at a time, and with the deluxe size, the cost came to just under 50 cents a piece. But when I first started doing them, I was selling them wholesale for $1, and then I raised the price. I think it came up to $1.50 a few years later. But what I did on my first trips, and I was turned on to this idea by yet another friend. So you notice it's like information coming from several different places, and I'm just sort of assembling it into a kind of a plan of action. So I'd already had the experience of selling the handmade cards. And then somebody else told me about a place where I could get mass-produced cards made for a price I could actually afford. And it was literally, this is important because nowadays we have short run digital printing everywhere. We've got lots of options for being able to do really short run, affordable. But back then there wasn't many. We didn't really have digital printing. We're talking 1994. So back then it was still traditional offset. And a lot of times you had to do thousands at a time, which is just ridiculous. You can't sell that many really. It's just not practical. The way that Modern Postcard did it was that they would gang print. So they would take individual orders like mine, and they would basically load them all up on a printing sheet and cut them, which is how they were able to offer runs that were as low as 500. So what happened is in the 90s, I wound up with, I would basically just all the work that I had at the time, I would go and get it scanned, professionally scanned. And I'm going to segue for a second here because I've seen some of your other interviews with other artists, and they're talking about, how they reproduce their work, and they're talking about using their own cameras and stuff. And I'm going to say I have a really good camera. I've got a Nikon D7200, which is a semi-pro, and it takes very, very good pictures. But I happen to know from comparing that it's still not as good as what you can get from a professional scanning lab. Professional scanning labs, like some of the references that I sent you in that one email where I was talking about local imaging references and stuff, they have equipment that costs tens of thousands of dollars, and that you can't even touch that. I mean, it might be possible to get a full frame camera, but the color and the detail that they pick up is far beyond anything that you can get with a camera that most artists would be likely to have. So I just want to go on that limb and say that if you're really looking for the best possible reproduction, imaging is the best way to go. Mm-hmm. So anyway, you get the image scanned, and then I go to Modern Postcard and I get these postcards done. And I started going on the road in 1995, and it was because I had another friend who'd gone on the road, and she'd had the actual experience of helping somebody else who was a mask and craft and dream catcher. So this friend I was talking about was helping another friend who was a Native American artist who literally made a living by going to sales or to stores, oftentimes making cold calls. And a cold call is where they don't know you, you don't know them. You're making, potentially a sale direct. And I have to say, there is a little bit of an art to that. Most of my visits are cold calls.
Yeah.
So here's how I do it. Okay, I'm sorry. I have this tendency to segue in different directions.
No, do it. I'm so curious about this.
So in the 90s, I started out with the postcards, and it wasn't until 1997 that I had an opportunity. It was a very special deal. It was a company called Color Q that offered 500 18 by 24 prints on extra heavy paper offset. So I got my Dionysus printed, and that's the only one that I have at that size, because the other ones are smaller and they're standard sizes, and I'll kind of get into that subject in a minute. So in the 90s, basically what I had for sale was these different postcards, which were not a standard size, but they were about 6 inches by 8.5 inches tall, but they were a really good size for altars. So a lot of people who practice pagan paths or polytheistic paths or alternative earth-based spiritual paths, they're very into shrine making and altar making, because this is part of the spiritual practice, and it's also part of how they might do magical activity if they're if they're people who do things like that. But well, the thing about these postcards is they were almost an ideal size for small shrines, so that was kind of a nice selling point right there. But yeah, so this person I was talking about, she had helped this other person, sell art directly. And it's kind of ironic because the person who helped, the one who was telling me, oh, we can do this, no problem. We went on a short road trip and I watched her try to make a cold sale, and she did very badly at it. It did not go through.
No.
However, and this is the thing that's interesting, watching her demonstrate how to do it, even though she did it badly and it failed, gave me enough of an idea of what I needed to do in order to actually make this work. So I just basically kind of took note of what wasn't working in this interaction, and I came up with a plan. So when I started going off on my own, well, first I would do my research. I would use the yellow pages, and later on it turned out to be online resources like the Witch's Voice. Witchvox was a website that was basically international in scope, and it was for connecting different kinds of pagan, witchy, polytheistic people together. And one of the most useful things it had on it was shop listings for every state. And I'm like, okay, cool, I'm gonna do this, because I would do a plan where I would basically have a goal in mind, like I want to end up somewhere and maybe experience something like, a particular event or a setting or whatever. And I'm going to plan my trip so that every leg of the journey is going to take me through an area that has stores. And the visits to the stores were usually cold calls. And what I would do is I would go to the store, and the very first thing I would do is and I still do this, is I look around and I'm trying to figure out, would my art actually fit in here? Is it appropriate? Is it appropriate? And there's been a few places where I'm like, no, the store is far too new agey. I don't think they would really go for the kind of stuff that I do, because my stuff is jewel toned. It's very sensual. It's very pagan. There are, bits on display here and there, and, a place that's too crystals and white light and whatever, it's like, that's not a good fit. And there's also like a thing that I noticed in Witchvox is that there would occasionally be head shops using Witchvox as a place to advertise themselves,
Right.
as if they were pagan, spiritual supply stores, when in actuality they were more like head shops, or import shops or whatever. So it's not actually an artistic environment. Now, places like that, I wouldn't really bother with, but they're rare. Usually if I could see even just a little bit of art, or if I can see enough of the kind of supplies like altar fixings, things like that, where my art would be a complement to it, I would say, you know, and a lot of times when I come in there, you know, people are on their game. So they say, hi, how are you doing today? Can I help you? And if this is before I've had a chance to look around, I say, I'd like a chance to look around a little bit first. And then, you know, let me get back to you, or yeah, you can help me, but let me look around first. And then I come back and I say, okay, I'm a pagan visionary artist from Minneapolis. I wanted to look around because I wanted to see if my art would fit in with your store. I actually think it would. Would you be interested in seeing my work? You know, and usually, I mean, to be frank, usually they say yes, because, you know, the way it works in this type of business is you can have a lot of very busy periods, and then sometimes you'll have a lot of dull stretches. So
Yeah.
even, you know, if there's nothing going on, there aren't any customers in the shop. So looking at something different is a diversion. I figured this out over the years too. So what I bring out, now I carry my inventory with me for sale. You know, so I have like these boxes of cards in 3-packs ready to go. I've got my prints all wrapped up, ready to go. I've got the magnets ready to go. So the way I do it is I have presentation books. So I've got a presentation book for the prints, and it basically shows the print plus the description on the back, like I said, and it's in, you know, an artistic presentation book that they can just, you know, look through. A similar situation with the greeting cards. So the greeting cards are put in flat so that they can see the text that's written about them on the back and the image, and they're blank on the inside, because not only is that more cost effective for printing, it's also, you know, efficient for displaying them. And I, with the magnets, I just literally bring out the magnets on trays. They're baking sheets. They're baking sheets that I actually use for baking when I'm not on the road, but I use them, yeah, like I stack the magnets about 5 on it. And of course it means they're pretty heavy because I have a lot of magnets, but I basically say, if you're into the magnets, this is how it works. You literally just pull off however many magnets you want. Don't worry about listing them, because, okay, here's another thing. It took me years to get to this point, because back when it was just postcards and the one print, I didn't need to bother doing this. But as the years went on and I added more different things, so I had like the different prints, and I had greeting cards and the magnets, around 2016, I created order forms, like tally forms. So I have a tally form where it's like all of the prints arranged by size and then alphabetically by name on one side. And then on the back of that, it's the greeting cards. And there's those little boxes or a line. So I tell people, okay, what you do is you go through the book, and anything you want, you just fill in a box or write in the number of how many prints, you know, and I don't do minimums on anything except greeting cards. The greeting cards, I have to print those in like a couple of thousand at a time. Fortunately, I've discovered a local company, Dolan Printing, that will allow me to do gang printing, a little bit like what I was talking about with Modern Postcard. Now, what this means is I can get, like, let's say 2,000 greeting cards printed, but they don't have to all be 2,000 of the same one. That's important, because basically the way it works with printing is the more you're getting at a time with a single order, the lower the price per unit comes down to be. So when I first started doing that with the greeting cards, I got like 50 each of several, and it came up to, at the time, I think it was about, well, I think the total came to around 750 or something like that. And those did really well. Greeting cards are very, very useful. I learned that when I was working behind the counter at Goddess Gallery Gardens, which was a metaphysical store. So that was very useful. And that's turned out to be something I can talk about when I'm on my selling trips. I say, I worked behind the counter at retail, so I know something about your business. And that's why the things that I make now are all standard sizes. Retailers are really big on that. If you make the art standard sizes, like 8.5 by 11, which is the size of most magazines in this country, 11 by 14, you make your greeting cards to be a standard size, so they will fit into greeting card racks that are standard made. That's a big thing. A lot of artists who are starting out and they don't know all that much about getting the reproductions made, Sometimes they get reproductions. Well, they do art in eccentric sizes, and then they get reproductions made that fit those eccentric sizes just in a diminished proportion. But what that means is, and this, see, like this is a selling point for me. So when I go in there and I say, okay, no minimums on prints, no minimums on magnets, you can get however many of any, and whatever combination you want. I do a minimum of 10 packs of the greeting cards. And I say, it's basically because I have to print these in large quantities. I've never had a problem with that. Anybody who's interested in the greeting cards, they do get at least 10, oftentimes more, especially after I explain, it doesn't have to be 10 of the same one. It's mix and match, 10, 1 3-pack of each of these, you get whatever you want. But then I tell them, okay, with the prints, these are all standard sizes. That means a customer comes into your store, they could go to a place like Michael's or any place that has pre-made frames, and they can find a frame to pop it into instantly. They don't have to worry about getting a customized or getting a mat cut that will change the shape of it. That's a feature that turns out to a benefit for both the retailer, because when I was working at Gaudi's Gallery Gardens, I learned a lot about the importance of standard sizes. So I made the determination back then, that was 2005 and 2006, that I really had to segue away from the postcards, which were not a standard size, into the greeting cards, and the greeting cards, okay, so here's the thing that I noticed, because when I was, this store was in Portland, Oregon. I was living in Portland at the time, and it was in a high-end boutique district with lots and lots of different variety stores. And there was a store only about a block or so away from us that specialized in greeting cards. And I remember talking to somebody who worked at that store, and they said it wasn't unusual for them to do $1,000 worth of business in a day on just greeting cards. And I realized from watching that, and also from watching the people who shopped at our store, they would come into a metaphysical store, and people have different reasons for going to stores like that. They're looking for knowledge. They're looking for things that they can create an altar or spiritual practice with, things like that. But they're also oftentimes looking for gifts. And so when you have greeting cards there, you've got things that can go with the gift. And what I noticed is, the more different kinds of cards there are, the more a person is going to do a thing like that. Oh, okay, so I've got this wonderful crystal to give to the person. And do you have any cards? I need to get a card to go with it. Oh my God, look at how many cards you've got. Oh, wow. Oh, okay, this card is going to be perfect for the gift, but I'm going to take this card and this card to add to my collection, Yeah, so it's kind of like working the retail end really gave me firsthand insight into how that works. And it also gave me the confidence back when, or forward to when I got the cards made, because, to make the cards, I had to do so much at a time. It was really a serious investment, it cost like, I think the last order was $1,500 or so dollars to do those, because I have to get all these images, but I realized, that's a selling point. The more images people have in cards, the more likely they are to sell cards, because greeting cards have this thing. It's like you can use them, but you can also save them as art in themselves. Right. So with the greeting cards, the first couple of runs that I did by myself. This last year, I basically talked my art partner, Helga Hedgewalker, and Angel Hawari into going in with me. And because they had some, each person had some that they wanted to get done, we wound up getting a total order cost that was just fantastic. I mean, the price per unit, printing, folding, scoring of the cards, plus the envelopes, came down to a price per unit where the markup that, well, like I am doing for wholesale and then retail was extremely favorable. So now that I mentioned that, and I'm on a roll here with this stuff.
Well, I actually have two questions for you that I'm so curious about. Mm-hmm. So one is that like the beauty of cold calling and you going across the country is like everything about that sounds like something that I want to do one day, where I just like get up and leave and then just like I get to go across the country. But like now, like in the 90s I could kind of see that, but like now with like computers and like, you know, everything else and Facebook page and social media, would you still cold call people?
Um, yes, in fact, one of the things that's been of great interest to me is now that I have more and more diverse things and just more stuff, I have more images and prints. I have a lot of images and greeting cards, and I have a lot of different things and magnets too. I'm actually making, excuse me, more money when I go on these sales. When I first did these sales, um, I was not making enough money to actually cover the trips. So it's a good thing that the trips were kind of like I had this objective of doing road trips because I wanted to see the country and I wanted to go to places, right? So by setting them up as selling trips for my art, they became a Schedule C expense. However, at the time, you know, this was the Clinton era, and we were all paying more in taxes.
Yeah.
It actually turned out to be useful because I had write-offs that I could apply to my regular taxes. Now, you know, the situation for the last, oh gosh, 6 years or so. I mean, I haven't been able to go on these road trips every year, and I'm really hardcore about my planning. When I first started out doing this in the mid 90s, I was kind of like, yeah, get in the car and just head off and, you know, stop at a place and look up at the yellow pages. Oh, this, by the way, this is really funny. I would look under 3 categories: metaphysical, occult, and new age. And let's see, the occult would always be between 2 other categories: nuts, edible, and occupational therapy. Those are the 3 categories that I would be able to find stores. So yeah, that was my thing. It was like I would drive to a metro area, stop at a gas station that was like on the far outskirts of town, look at the yellow pages in those 3 categories, and then use the map in my car to try and figure out where those places were, and then drive to as many as I could before 5 o'clock on that one day, especially if I was just passing through. I mean, sometimes I would have like a hostel to stay at, because that's another thing. The biggest cost, the biggest expenditure has always been in lodging. And I'm going to go on a limb and say this too. When I first started out, I was using hotel discount programs, and then somebody turned me on to the concept of hostels. Hostels are great in general. There's some that are kind of scuzzy, but in general, the concept of hostels is great. However, not every place that I needed to go has had them. So in 2019, I started using Airbnb, and oh my God, I am never looking back. I don't think I'm going to do conventional hotels anymore. I saved so much money. When I came back from my first trip, it was a trip in January 2019 where I went down to Texas and back again. So it wasn't a super involved trip. I was able to do the whole thing in 11 days. I went back, and just for giggles, I went and said, okay, well, you know, if I had been using the lowest published hotel coupons for the same places I stayed at, how much more would it have cost me? Because what got me thinking I need to try Airbnb was because I went online. It used to be that I would, you know, back in the analog days when you would literally stop at road stops and get those paper coupon things for hotels and then go in and hope that they would honor them. And then there came to be a point where I would just go online to hotel coupon websites. But what I've noticed lately is that these places, instead of giving you actual rates, would say, oh, it's 20% off a rack rate or whatever. And I'm like, well, what the hell does that mean? You know, that's not giving me an idea of what the actual price is going to be with the coupon and whatever. So I said, oh, screw this. I'm going to look into Airbnb. And I'm like, oh my God, I
Yes.
get rooms this cheap. And my first trip was great. I went on, and I'm glad I did this because, you know, I had no idea coronavirus, right? But I went on 3 road trips in 2019, and I did really well in terms of gross sales. I made a new record. And so like the first one was to Texas and back. And then the second one was in August. And I had a specific agenda of seeing the Burning Man art exhibit in Cincinnati. And a window of time while that exhibit was still up opened up. So it basically threw together a plan. And I went to Cincinnati and Columbus and Cleveland and then back again. And I did really well because, oh my goodness, there's so many more stores there. The witchy population in Cleveland in particular has really just exploded. And then in November, I did a trip that was just to Chicago and back again, because I didn't, in 2019 on my other trips, even though I'd passed through Chicago, I didn't have enough time to really do business there. I mean, Chicago's gigantic. It is 80% the size of London, which is like 10 million people. Chicago is like 8 million. You know, it's like, it'd take you all day to drive from the top of Chicago to the bottom. So if you're gonna do business in Chicago, you really have to plan it out. So I did. I had a friend to stay with and that worked out really well. So yeah, I would definitely say use Airbnb to cut the lodgings down, because when you're literally passing through and you just need a bed for the night, what most people have, which is that spare bedroom or whatever, is more than good enough. And all of my interactions were fantastic. I suppose I've been very lucky that way. I've also used hostels because I like hostels. I like the hostel concept. I wound up needing a hotel like only once on those particular trips. So that's exciting. If you are thinking serious, Danielle? Hey, Danielle, you're kind of frozen on my end. Oh, there we go. Oh, there you go.
Are you there?
Yeah, you've been frozen. Oh, there we go. You're moving again. You're kind of breaking up for some reason.
Sorry, 1 second.
Here I've been talking about
Hey,
the,
babe. We don't have any internet.
that's something I wasn't foreseeing. You're starting to come back. You look a little pixelated, frozen. That's odd.
I'm still here. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can.
Okay. It says
Yeah.
that I. Okay, now it's connecting. I am so sorry, Paul.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. We'll just roll with it.
And you know, this will, it looks like we might be, uh-oh, let's see. Okay. We'll get back on that. You know, this will be a good time for me to start sharing the screen of what I have for your stuff too.
Oh, before you do that, let me
Yeah.
pull out some of the things that I have sitting by here, because I think we want to do this like a combination of virtual and showing a few things. So, whoa, my goodness. Oh, you don't sound like you're coming through. Oh, jeez. Oh, I'm the host now. Okay. Well, how's it going over there?
It looks like it's working right now. Weirdly, every time Juan is turning on the microwave, I'm not having internet. So
The microwave is interfering with your connection?
no, but every time he turns it on, it looks like I'm not having internet.
That's bizarre.
I know. So I mean, it says it's streaming live now.
Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to show and tell a few physical things before we go
Yeah,
on to the screen sharing
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
And I was going on and on about prints and going on journeys and selling, and that's a topic that can be enlarged even more in the future. But one of the things that you see behind me is this giant paper mache mask.
yeah.
So where this came from is back when I first started getting prints made, which was in the middle of the aughts. It was digital short run, but you had to get like a minimum of 500 or something like that. And there were some images that I had made where I knew after about 11 years of schlepping them around, I wasn't going to be able to sell through all of them, and I didn't want to drag around all of the prints, later. So I thought about what I could do with the extras, and I got a lot of ideas thrown at me from artist friends who were saying things like, oh, you could leave them in places on these cities that you visit, or you could give them away, or you could do promo things that sounded like a lot of hard work. And basically what I ultimately decided to do was take a certain amount of excess out and shred them and turn them into paper mache. So I shredded them, and then I put the shreds into a blender, and then I made pulp and dried the pulp and turned it into paper mache material. Now, why I did that as opposed to the other things that were suggested to me is not only so that I could create myself a new, art media and actually make things that would be another creative form that could be displayed and sold. I've actually sold a couple, and the two that I've sold are on the Instagram that we'll look at a little bit later. But also, and this comes back to the best practices kind of a thing, is I wanted to take them out of circulation and not just give them away freely, because if I did that, I felt like that would be devaluing the ones that people had already paid money for. So
Yeah.
this is an example of a highly artist-specific thing that people want to be thinking about. And on that line, by the way, this is something I also do with online sales and with anybody really that makes a good wholesale purchase from me. I always do a lanyap. A lanyap, it looks like it should be pronounced lanyap, but it's a New Orleans expression. I lived in New Orleans for a while, and it means a little something extra. And a lot of people who are really good sellers on eBay, Etsy, do this too. It's like somebody has been good enough to order your art or your craft or whatever. So you add a little something extra to thank them for doing that. And I do this with all of my online orders, and I almost always do this now. Anybody who, a store that orders, usually $100 or more, I'll add something, so like with the online orders, usually it tends to be a few of the postcards that I have left, because I'm burning my way through the very last of the postcards. I don't actually sell them retail very often. There's a few stores that are actually buying them, because in my efforts to burn them off, I'm doing like special promos. If you buy 10 or more, I automatically double up, which is good. I still make my money back and a
Yeah.
slight profit,
Yeah.
but and some people really like them, even though I'm down to just a few images left. But I've got two of them where I have a lot left. So I add those, somebody sends an order, I add those, and I add a few of my business cards, which look fancy and so on. So the paper mache, I hadn't actually intended to get back into sculpture until I came up with this as a good idea for getting rid of excess prints. So the Green Man beer. This is an example of one of the first masks that I made. So this is like made on a dish as a mold. And I'm just literally, making the face. I actually really like this, partly because the doll eyes give it a lot of character. And this is another one. Again, it's working with the Green Man theme.
Yes.
And as it happens, the one that's behind us is also going to be a Green Man. My intention is to have that be one of the elements in a show that my art partner, Helga Hedgewalker, and I, and our friend, Roger Williamson, who I mentioned earlier in this conversation, he's the owner of Megas Books. He's also an artist. So the three of us have pitched a proposal to the Vine Arts Center, which, will be entertained for 20 I think 2022 at this point. And I can get back to that later. Well, all right, I might as well do it now. This is in terms of projects that we have in the future, because that's another thing when you're an artist. Some of your artists that you've interviewed have already alluded to this in one way or another, but so there's the selling of your art. That's a practical thing. But the other thing, and this is really important, I learned this when I was living in New Orleans, because I applied for what they called a Louisiana mini grant, which was up to $500 to pay for something specific. And I didn't make the cut of the final people who got into it. And I called them and I found out why. This was back in the year 2000. And I found out it was because they thought that my art looked fantastic. They thought my write-up for why I needed the money was fantastic. They just didn't think my track record of exhibition was enough, because you were given a numerical scoring on all of those things. And this, by the way, is a big deal in the fine arts world, because your eligibility for grants, your standing, a lot of it has to do with your exhibition record. So I went to work. I had actually my first solo show that year, and I started creating more opportunities to be seen in, because this is a lot like with your situation with the otherworldly arts. I've fallen between the cracks in many cases. And so at various points in my life, I've had to create opportunities to be seen. So like back in the 1990s, I was running this very pagan-friendly group art show called the Crossroads Festival. In 2004, my big thing was curating the Erotic Angels art event. You know, of course, my art was part of that too. And so that was apart from the erotic art show that the collective did. That's literally the only other erotic art show that's happened here. And you could tell we had the same kind of attendance that you did. It was like packed. This town really needs that kind of a thing on a more consistent basis. There's such a desire for it.
I just wish I wouldn't have gotten banned all the time, or I don't know.
Oh, I know.
It was so challenging. Like every single time I was like, really? Like sex still exists in the Midwest, everybody.
Oh, for goodness sake. Yeah, and look at the audience, right? I know it's an ongoing conundrum. So back when I moved back here again, which was 2008, in 2012, Helga Hedgewalker and I began something at the Paganicon conference, which evolved into what we call the Third Offering Gallery. And it comes from a writing of Steve Posh, who's like, he's an elder and a teacher in our community. He's basically saying that the first offering is water for life. The second offering is bread for sustenance. The third offering is beauty, art. That's the food of the soul. So we called it the Third Offering Gallery. And that started out as an environment for pagan identified artists to be able to show their work in a pagan-friendly, polytheistic, it's earth religions kind of context. And it's been very popular. It's actually turned into one of the, I would say, a selling feature of the convention. And oddly enough, we're still the only convention of that type that has it. However, what happened as a result of that is that we and some of the other people that were involved in this were so pumped. Like, we wanted to create an organization to be able to start creating exhibition experiences outside of that. So Helga and Roger and I and another person created the MCPA, which is the Minneapolis Collective of Pagan Artists. And we began a thing where basically we found through experience that we created really good show proposals. So our first one was Doorways to the Underworld, which we did around.
I love that so much.
That was in 2014. Yeah, and so that was like around Halloween, which is Samhain time. So that's the traditional opening of the gates to the other world. You know, the dead and the living interface freely at that time. We did probably one of our biggest, our most successful shows so far. It was our first show at the Vine Arts Center, Modern Pagans, Ancient Realms. And we did another one called Mother Night, the Goddess in Winter. And there is actually, solstice is called Mother Night, Mutternacht, in old Anglo-Saxon and Norse traditions. It turned out to be just amazing. I mean, just, it worked out extremely well. So what's happened is we've been, we made overtures to the Modus Locus Gallery in Powderhorn, which is just amazing. That place is a real crossroads of diversity. It's a real happening spots for all kinds of different artistic expressions and people in South Minneapolis, and just amazing. And so we have a show. It was going to have opened up this month, as a matter of fact, but we met with Ephraim, the owner, and we have it rescheduled for 2021. We don't know the dates yet because basically we need to check in at the end of this year and find out what things are looking like and so forth. And that one's going to be called Meet Me at the Crossroads, A Witch's Eye View of Fairy.
Nice.
So it's about fairy is about the land of the ancestors, the spirits, and the elementals of nature interfacing with the humans. So it's really that point where they cross, you know. So there's a lot of imagery about life and death, about in spirit and nature and so forth. And at some point, I want to show the video. In fact, if I can do this right now, if you can, yeah.
Here, let me make you a host.
Okay.
And then you can show
Okay.
that video.
I'll pop this up first and then share screen. So it's this, share. So this video that we're looking at here is a preview of what the window display is going to look like in Modus Locus. And this is, so like there's a 9 feet by 12 feet painting behind there. This is sort of like the tree of fairy. There's this floating life-size skeleton going on there, and you know, these fairy mound kind of a things. And so we're gonna have the lights that will go in and out and so forth.
Yeah.
Modus Locus has a very small, intimate gallery, but they've got this amazing window display. So this is going to be the pretty much the ensemble of what goes in the window for this particular thing. So the video is just kind of giving you an idea of what the lights look like. So the skeleton is a reference to death, and the flowers that are in the skeleton are a reference to life. The spirals that are in the rock shapes, you know, the spirals that are coming out of the leaves, you know, just all of this energy. It's all about the normally unseen magical energy kind of existing everywhere. It's about the intersection of life and death. And so that's kind of where this particular image is coming from. So I'm going to stop the share. And let's see, do I have to? Yeah.
I think you have to make me the host again.
Yes, there we go.
Then I get a notification. And then we should start looking at
oh yeah. So really quickly.
Whoops.
Oops.
Sorry.
Oh.
There. I stopped shared. I stopped shared.
Yes, actually it's one of the other forms of painting that I'm doing. So this is, I've been getting into painting on animal bones. So this is a horse skull. And I did actually show this at Gods and Monsters last fall. I've entered it into the state fair because this was literally the only thing I had that I thought might be interesting and different enough, but also of like general public interest, because I've known it's hard getting into the state fair art competition. I've known several people who've tried for many years to do it. And one thing I've noticed is that if your artwork is too fringe, they don't go for it. They apparently want things to fit within a sort of a generalized range of what the general public would find interesting and acceptable.
I know, I feel like anytime I go there, granted, last year had a couple outliers, but it's generally like landscape portrait photography, landscape portrait photography. Like, and I feel like it's almost like a pattern. like whoever's doing it is like, we need to make sure we have landscape portrait photography, like over and over and over again.
Well, I mean, they do have those categories. It's just that, it's like, I don't know. I think that it's just they edit out things that just seem like they're too specialized in their interest. So last year, one of my paintings, which is in my Instagram, I submitted it, but it's basically a face in an ornate frame. And I thought, okay, this is unusual enough that they might take an interest. But it's not like controversial in the sense of sending out signals of a highly specialized interest, which is kind of what I think. So I don't know. We'll see. I'll find out next week if they've taken this or not. So they're doing a virtual exhibition this year.
Which I didn't know that they were doing, but it was the one time that I applied for the state fair, I did a very large collaboration piece with somebody, and we got disqualified because they're like, you can't have two artists.
Really?
Yeah, and it was super weird because they're like, we just aren't set up for two artists in a collaboration piece. And they're like, you guys will have to choose. And like, we were like, no, that's weird. Like, why can't you put two names? And then we were like, okay, you're making this way more complicated. So like,
Yeah. That's too bad though, because
I
it
know.
sounds like they were interested in the piece apart from that. 'Cause
I
I just,
guess, but like, I was like, that's really unfair to like one of us,
oh,
like,
right. Yeah. Well, I
so
never knew. I don't even remember that they have it in their rules about that, that
I
it
don't
has
think they
a single
did. I
artist.
think it was just extra paperwork or
Yeah.
something because like, like, well, when we did it, it was like actual paperwork. So like, I don't know, but like, I have heard that like, I haven't tried again and I keep meaning to, and then I always forget because the deadline's like sometime in April, and that's usually around the Unicorn Art Show. And like up until like the last day of the Unicorn Art Show, like I don't have good brains. Like people are always like, you should do something for Artworld. And I'm like, no, I'm done.
I get it. I get it. Yeah, you have to prioritize your brain power.
I'm gonna share my screen so that we can get some of your art. I realize we're a little over time, but sorry for the technical difficulties. Should we start
Oh,
at the bottom?
yeah. The way I've arranged this is I've got some uh, example pieces from the different art forms that I do. So like at the bottom is paintings. And yeah, you could like literally, the one that I was talking about for the state fair is the face that's in that ornate frame. And
This one?
no, scroll downwards a little bit.
This one.
No, yeah, the one that's, yeah, her. This is a good example of painting something to go in the frame because the frame is so complicated and so small,
Yeah.
only something really strong would work. So yeah, I got the idea to submit that to the state fair and it got in. It didn't win an award or anything, but it got in. Yeah, so they sold that.
So Paul, you don't know this, but like I feel like Angel may have brought you like into our folds, but how I met you is actually through this painting.
Oh, really?
So I don't think you were there, but like, there's a lot of times that like I'm always rushing back and forth through all of the artwork that we do and stuff. And I remember that this went up on the wall and I stopped and I was like, whose is this? This is amazing. This is new. And I was like, this is so great. Like, and it was so different from some of the stuff that we had had. And like, and I'm not saying that like the subject of the Green Man, doesn't exist in the world. It was just that it was something that we hadn't had yet. And I felt so privileged to like have it with us. And it was like, I kept going back and forth and back and forth. And I just really enjoyed it so much.
Oh,
And I
thank
don't think
you.
that I actually met you until like the next show that we had or something. But or if I met you, it was brief, but
Yeah.
like I just wanted to like to let you know that this is how I was introduced to Paul.
Well, I want to tell you, this is how I often interpret the call for art for the unicorn show. Because you guys say, you know, unicorns and how do you put it? It's like anything that can exist in a world that has unicorns in it. And the way that I interpret that is it's Narnia. If you can find it in Narnia, and you can definitely find things like Green Man and River God type images in Narnia. You know, it's just a Narnian thing. I love the fact that the unicorn show is open to things that aren't just unicorns, but that would coexist with unicorns, because that just makes it a very rich exhibition, in my opinion.
I thought about changing the name, but I was like, no, I got some roots in the unicorn. Like, if anything, like the unicorn is, let's say it's the start of the forest of the unicorn art show,
Yeah,
you know? And
yeah.
it's like, but it was, I think it's hard to have people always make a unicorn when there's so much other fantasy that can exist.
Well,
You
they
know?
interpret that literally, whereas the unicorn is really the emblem for the unique and magical creature. I think that's what it's about, unique and magical creatures. And there's more of them than the unicorn. It's just that the unicorn is the symbol that stands in for all of them.
But what do you want to look at next?
Well, given that we're kind of going over time, keep scrolling upward
Okay.
so that we get past the paintings.
I told you you're so easy to talk to, Paul. And
Thank
then
you. Okay, stop here.
okay.
We'll go back downish a little bit. Okay, so yeah, this is fine. We'll just kind of, so this is another thing that I've been doing. Actually, you know what? Scroll down just a little bit more because I want to point out the similar. Okay, there we go. Stop. All right. So the last of the paintings in the series is the androgen. That's the one in the center. That's an old one, but I just love it. I still own the original because it has a very calming symmetry. And interestingly, that's the one that's been published the most often. I've had that on 2 book covers and 3 magazine covers since it was painted. So the one that's immediately to the left of it, I call that one the Fairy Madonna. And that is my friend and roommate, Brenda Seneschal is the model, you know. So this was one of my earliest examples of doing photography as a thing in itself. So she asked me to paint her for a special ritual that she was doing. And so the makeup that's on her is how I painted her. What she's wearing was hers. And we did this whole long session, and this one particular image, or the image, the photo that turned out to be the basis for this image, was so breathtaking. I mean, I think it was really the one that got me started on what I now call camera paintings, which is where I do these photo sessions. I was so impressed with the mood of it because it was not just a regular picture of a person in makeup or whatever. It was its own artistic thing. So what I did was I took it into Photoshop and started doing more things to kind of just bring out the feeling of what it was. And that one really got me started with that. If you click this one off and go back to the grid. Okay, so the one that's immediately up, the painted face on the right. Yeah, that one. This is the same person and the same year. And she is wearing makeup that I'd actually done on myself. You can't see it in this picture, but she's painted literally from head to toe. It took me and another artist over 6 hours to paint her. No one has ever been that feat. So yeah, we covered her all up with black pancake makeup and then painted acrylic paint on top of it. So same person, totally different mood. All right, click off of that one and let's go look at a couple of others. So yeah, going up a little bit. The next 3 are all the same model. And then, okay, so what I do in these things is I'm painting people up in body makeup, and then I'm taking them to interesting locations to photograph them. And then I take the best of those photographs into graphics programs like Photoshop in order to heighten, you know, because I'm not concerned about it looking real. It already doesn't look real. That's not the thing. I want to heighten that enhanced, magical, dreamlike atmosphere. So go ahead and click on the blue man with the horns. Yeah, because this is a good example. Okay, so in this particular case, Where I photographed the model was in a carved sandstone cavern that it's a real place. It's where the Minnehaha Falls Trail meets the Mississippi River. There's a series of carved out caves that might actually go all the way back to Prohibition rum running days. And it's a cavern that I photographed a couple of different models in. This is before night, so it's still day. The model was wearing, solid black makeup to obscure his face. And he's got the black horns and he's got like this black netting. Basically, the idea is I wanted to do him like a figure from a dream, like a horned figure from the dream. So in this particular instance, his skin wasn't painted blue. I actually added that later, and I added a filter. So what's behind him is the sandstone cavern, but I added something called the oil paint filter, which creates these oil paint textures, and well, this is a little intricate, but I wound up having to do expanded, enlarged versions because the oil paint filter I was giving me this really nice kind of curved wire kind of a look.
Mm-hmm.
So it turned out to be kind of complicated to get that up to the full res image, which is an image where the resolution is high enough and big enough that you could create an industry standard Giclée reproduction. So that was a little complicated and technical. Let's go back to the grid. All right, so the one that's immediately to the left of it, where he's holding the torch, click on that. This is the same cavern. This is the cavern. So this is the cavern at night, and there's all these little tea lights that are put into the divots. Now you can't really tell in this picture, but the cavern, people have carved not just holes, but graffiti of all kinds. And the thing is, when it's photographed, it actually looks like these weird, mysterious symbols or sigils or something like that. So I've done 2 different model sessions with different models in this particular area because it's just so atmospheric. And this is a real place, but it looks like it's somewhere in a dream. But this is a real place. Anybody who lives in this metro area could actually go there and do their own photo session in this place.
I love it. I want to go there. I didn't even know.
Oh yeah, it's a little tricky to find because you're not going to be able to get the exact location on Google Maps. And so when I first found it, I kind of did a screenshot of the closest approximation that Google Maps had and then added annotations, to find it. So the only other thing about this place is that parking is paid parking and it's really limited. So we were very lucky on all the photo sessions that I did. I went there with usually 2 assistants plus the person that I was photographing. And fortunately, we were able to get parking that was near the entrance that leads into this place. I don't know what we would have done because it's so hard. I mean, that's the thing. I remember in your interview with Crystal, you were talking about her photo sessions and stuff. And
Yeah.
she uses like a professional studio setup to do that. But she was talking about how she has assistants, Well, the thing is, I'm using like basically amateur friends who are helping me out. So they're doing things like, for example, holding an LED light to get backlighting or, just basically they're there to hold other things beside the camera and things like that. But coordinating people's schedules is so rough. Even when you're talking only 3 or 4 people, finding a day that everybody can be there together. So it's like, you got to keep your fingers crossed that the weather is going to cooperate and they all find parking during that area, that place and all that. So, as far as finding this place goes, send me an email or a message sometime and I will dig up the annotated map thing that I made. And you can hopefully kind of figure out where it is from there. Once you find it, it'll seem really obvious. It's the place where the Minnehaha Falls Trail meets the Mississippi River. But until you're there for the first time, it's a little tricky to find. Okay, let's go back to the grid. So the picture that's on the immediate left of that one, before we go to the drawings, this one is not actually a person. This is a photo that I captured when I was on one of my art trips in a small art town. It is a place in New Mexico that impressed me so much. I actually thought about living there. I mean, not super seriously, but I've been in many small art towns. This was the first one where I actually stopped and thought, what would it be like to live here? I really like the atmosphere of this place. So, you know, I was taking pictures all over the place to document it. And this started out as just a photo of a statue. And basically I did a lot of Photoshop stuff to kind of just turn it into an art image. So this is not an actual person. This is a statue of a person. But I wanted to show that because it's another example of how I'm doing the digital plasticity to create an image that's sort of, you know, more than just a photograph. It becomes a altered artifact.
Mhm.
All right, let's go to the drawings. So yeah, the next, I do a lot of drawings. I love, you can pick any one of them to open up. I absolutely love drawing. I started out with my art drawing, as a matter of fact. Yeah, so this particular one has wash added to the line drawings. And it's interesting, I'm kind of noticing for the first time that Instagram seems to de-res things a little bit. I may have to redo some of these images because they're looking a little fuzzed out compared to the sharpness that they should normally have. But anyway, yeah, so this is pen and ink. There's no wash in this particular one, but I love doing this. This is an interpretation of Kore, which is another name for Persephone. It means the maiden. Oh, and I should explain this. The mythological element to this is like in Greek mythology, you know, Persephone was, depending on the version of the story, abducted by Hades, the god of the underworld, mourned for by her mother Demeter, and then eventually released to come back. It's their way of explaining why we have winter and spring. So this is how this particular drawing came about. I found an image of a model that had this really intense expression on her face. You know, she's a young and beautiful maiden model, but I'm like, my God, the look on her face, she looks like, so it immediately gave me the idea for she looks like a Kore, because I'm like someone who's just returned from the underworld with all of this power to bring green lives and plants, you know, she would have an intense look.
Yeah.
So that's where the artistic impetus to make this image came from.
Nice.
Yeah. So, all right.
So how
Oh,
big are your drawings?
go on the one that's like got the stag coming out. Yeah, that, or the right in the center. Yeah. This is a huge, this image has turned out to be a hugely popular one. People are really into it. I'm like, and I think this is cool because this is basically, it's the guy who's at the bottom is the same model as for the peacock angel that was down below. And I've just, in this drawing, I've just basically combined his image with a little sketch that I did from somewhere else. I didn't even remember. It was back in the days when we had Borders books in the 90s. And there was some kind of artsy magazine that was just way too expensive to buy the whole magazine for just one image. But there was some image in it where somebody had created this, this somehow cropped image of just part of a stag or a deer's head. And so I did an actual sketch drawing rather than buy the magazine. It was like $25. Like it was one of those really high-end artsy things. And I can't justify buying it when it's just one image that I want in it. So I basically created the sketch and then years later just put it together. Drawings like this are fun. I love doing them. Just, you know, they're just a real pleasure to go off and do all those, you know, designs and scrolls. Okay, go to the statue, the blue one. Yep. This is my most ambitious paper mache sculpture right now. Called it Remembering the God. And the god in particular, it's basically about the rebirth of the horned god of the witches, which is the forces of nature, particularly animal life personified. So I made the arms and the torso out of the paper mache that I was talking about. And that skeleton that we saw earlier, that's going to be in the window display, that's my skeleton actor. I use it in different kinds of ensembles. So in this one,
Nice.
it was wrapped up like a chrysalis or a seed. You know, the idea is that this reborn image of the god is coming right out of it. But you'll notice that there's this giant gold, well, not giant, it's still proportional, but this gold phallus in the center there. I'm really glad they let us do that. I mean, I was so invested in making this particular image because it fit with the modern pagans, ancient realms theme, but also because I felt like it was, you know, it was a real statement on, you know, 30 years of involvement with this scene for me. And it's just, it kind of harkens to the myth of Osiris, Isis and Osiris in the Egyptian mythos. In that particular story, Osiris, who's the green god in that one, the dying and reborn god, is cut to pieces by his evil brother Set. So his wife Isis, Set, who is the magician, has to go and retrieve all the pieces of his body from scattered from far and yon. And she puts them all together, but the one that's missing is the phallus, the part that gives joy. It has been eaten by a fish or a Nile crab or a spider, kind of depends on the variety. So Isis creates a new phallus out of gold or silver, again, depending on the version of the story. And with it, he is able to impregnate her. So her son Horus, the sun god, is born as a result of that. And as Steve Posh has given it to me, this is kind of a metaphor for what we're doing, reconstructing these ancient indigenous polytheistic earth-centered nature religions. We're putting the pieces together, but the part of it that's the ecstasy, we have to create that for ourselves. So the golden, it's not, sometimes a phallus is not just a phallus, it's a symbol. And I have to tell you, when we were doing the erotic art show thing, I really actually considered submitting the torso of this, and I may do so in the future. But
yeah. I mean, Safe Words at this moment is still, I mean, it's still in the books. We want to try.
okay, well, you know,
Who knows what 2021 will bring?
well, right, and there does need to be more male art, you know, more
Yes.
male art, and you know, this is a very different interpretation of male sexuality. But anyway, I wanted to show this because this is a example of sculpture and assemblage put together, and this is probably the most ambitious thing I've done so far with the paper mache. So we could click out on that and go up to, yeah, we go up a little bit more, and so yeah, like oh gosh, which one to talk about? Well, the sun face that's on the left and the night face that's on the right are other things that I've done with paper mache. The painted skull there with the lotus in the center, that was actually my first ever painted skull, and it went so well. That's what gave me the idea to start doing more. You know,
Yeah.
I've refused to sell it because I needed to do more in order to find out whether this one was a fluke or whether I'd be able to do the same level of, I don't know what you call it, integration with it. But this is also an expression of a witchy idea in a symbolic form. Yeah. So the stang, which is it's a staff that has a branching into two at the top with a candle in the center of the branch. That is an interpretation of the horned god of the witches, but it's also a symbol of the human being, because humans are animals and we have the fire of consciousness, of self-awareness, you know, in the center. That's so the light that burns between the horns is a symbol of that self-awareness, that capacity for magical thought and activity of consciousness. So what I think is really cool about this is it's kind of a symbol for humanity that doesn't involve an image of an actual human.
All right.
And so the four that are at the top are me in different magical personas. So that thing that we saw down below with Brenda all painted up, the painted angel, like the one that would be on the far left of the second column there.
This one?
Yeah, that one. Go ahead and click that. I did this for that show that I curated, Erotic Angels. So I didn't literally put on makeup from head to toe. It was just the exposed parts of my face, and that took long enough to paint anyway. One of the professional photographers who was part of that exhibition took this picture of me at that night. And so you can't really see it, but I made the whole outfit. So the headdress that I'm wearing, like those medallions and things that are hanging, are parts of a ballet dancing belt that I repurposed into decoration on this headdress. The leather jacket that I'm wearing, I hand painted all of that. So yeah, it's kind of like once you learn the skills for the drawing and the painting, you could translate them. So the two where the makeup is blue, pick either one of them and open that up.
This one?
This is a character that I haven't done since 2009. It's the Blue Man. I did this when I attended my first Fairy Worlds conference in the Portland, Oregon, well, the Eugene, Oregon area, back when I was still living on the West Coast. So I've been there 2006, 2007, 2009, and I've gone as this character. It takes 3 hours to put on the makeup. I made the hat, the burnout velvet jacket that you see, I hand painted that. So that started out as black. That's all painted with basically different kinds of metallic acrylic paints. And I painted the parasol. Now, you can see from the text up there, this one has an interesting story because this wound up in Maxim magazine, if you can believe it.
What?
Yeah, when I came back from the West Coast, I moved back here in July of 2008, and I found out, because somebody had sent me a tip or something, that Maxim magazine was doing a feature on the unconventions, unusual festivals, and they had a whole little sidebar thing about Fairy Worlds. And this picture by Kyra Wiltshire was used as their representative image for that. What I find amazing about that is usually that if only a single person is used to represent Fairy Worlds, it tends to be a female image. So I thought that was pretty amazing right there. If you go back to the grid, let's go to the one where the parasol is open.
Paul, I have to go turn on some lights. It's getting a little dark in here. I will be right back. So you just keep talking.
Okay. So this is hand painted parasol. Took a really long time to do it. Not sure if I'm supposed to continue talking. Please stand by. Oh my gosh. So yeah. My, we are overtime. Wow.
Sorry, 1 second.
Oh, that's okay. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to keep talking or not.
Yes, keep talking. I'm sorry, I can't get these all the lights to work. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just saying that the entire parasol is hand painted. It's a Battenberg lace parasol that started out as black. And so that was painted. It took a long time. It was tricky to figure out how to do it. So this particular photo was part of a private session in 2007. It hasn't been used for publicity, but basically every single year that I've gone to Fairy Worlds in this persona, I have been photographed by the professional photographers who are there. And an image, at least one image of me has wound up being used for their national publicity campaigns, which is kind of a brag for me. And I guess one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this Blue Man image is We don't have anything like Fairy Worlds in the Midwest because Fairy Worlds is kind of a coastal thing. They do Fairy Worlds on the West Coast and they do Fairy Con in the East Coast, and flyover country is ignored as usual. So we have to make our own entertainment over here as usual. And I'm going to be resurrecting this character though, because I was talking about how in 2021, Helga Hedgewalker and I are having a two-person show called Meet Me at the Crossroads, A Witch's Eye View of Fairy. And so this is it's going to be an exploration of the concept of fairy from the point of view of witches who are hedgewalkers. They are people who walk in between the margins of the civilized and the wild, and who are kind of, walking that interface between the magical and the normal worlds. So a witch's view of fairy is informed by many things. The tradition that the other world is the world of ancestral spirits. And it's a place of shamanic journeying. It's a place where nature, the forces and forms of nature take on personas, can actually interact with you. So anyway, I'm going to be resurrecting the Blue Man persona when we do our opening night. Our opening night for that particular exhibition is going to be a fairy themed costume ball. And so I'm going to be doing this. Helga is going to wear her amazing Tree of Life outfit, which is from head to toe. She's got this incredible headdress and these rainbows and oh my God, it's just amazing. And when we have our closing for that exhibition, we're going to be doing a group ritual drama. So whoever shows up on closing, we're actually going to be doing a participatory ritual drama with them, which will involve, among other things, the burying of a crossroads talisman on the Modus Locus land. Nice. So that's one of the things about our scheduling for that show. It's going to need to be at a warm period of the year. So at this point, we're guessing maybe, late May, early June, or possibly like this time of year, August. We can't go past early to mid-September for a closing date because we have to make sure that our closing date for this show is going to be on a day that's warm enough for people to actually stand being outside. Yeah. Which is why, for example, we can't do it in March or October because it's really just not warm enough. But it's going to be pretty cool. We'll have more to say about it when we get dates fixed and so forth. The nice thing is we've already done quite a bit of work. So, you were asking at various points about what are people doing with their coronavirus time. Well, I gotta say, it's been really good for focusing because I'm like Sarah Whitty, who she said that her actual life hasn't changed that much because, she does the introverted creative thing. And, truthfully, my life, for the most part, except for going out for the project work and stuff like that, hasn't changed that much either. The only difference is the things that I used to have that I could use as carrots, as motivators, like, I would tell myself, okay, do, this much work on this project and these paintings and whatever. And then if you do, you can go off and visit a museum or see a movie or go to a play or hang out with people. Much of that has been curtailed. So I've had to redesign my carrots for doing work because a lot of the things that it's a thing where I would have to spend so much time at home sitting on my butt in front of a computer or in front of an easel or something like that. And then, my carrot would be, okay, if you do that, then you can go out and do this and that. And, and now it's kind of limited. Thank goodness we could still go outside for walks and for exercising and stuff like that. I'm just wondering what it's going to be like when we're in winter, because now that we've been through this for a few months, it's like, we're probably going to have to expect that at least the rest of the year is going to be kind of like we've been experiencing since March. And I'm thinking, it'll be a good idea for us to be realistic about that and start planning ahead for how we're going to, incorporate that. I'm just choosing to look on it the most positively I can. It's going to give me a really big block of time uninterrupted to do my website redo, and once that's done, it'll just be a matter of tooling it occasionally. The big work is just making the thing. So, you know what I mean? It's like you gotta look for whatever positives there are. And I'm supposing that for other people out there who've been sitting on long-term projects that are really going to take a while to get done, look at this as an opportunity to actually get those things done, or at least make some progress on them. That might not be so easy to do when you have more stuff coming at you for more opportunities for involvement.
And I mean, we can also adapt. I mean, like what we're doing right now is adapting. We're doing the
Yeah.
best that we can during this pandemic. And it's like, you know, who knows what the future will be and how soon things would go back to doing in live events. But I mean, we are very fortunate, and I'm very grateful that we live in an era during a pandemic that we do have access to the internet. We do have access where we're not
Yeah.
going to lose each other, really. I mean, like, I want more than anything to get back into, like, you know, a more physical world with everything.
Yeah.
But like, even even this level of difficulty is 1,000 times better than being stuck completely alone. Like,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
not alone,
Yeah.
I'm not alone, like, we are not alone. Like, it's lonely, but we are not alone.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree with that. It's just, it's a matter of you kind of have to flex your thinking a little bit in order to see um, advantages or at least positives
Yeah.
to the situation. So, like for instance, with this whole thing about learning how to do and then executing the Zoom interviews, you know, you're building a skill that's going to be useful in multiple different situations in the future, especially with the kind of future that I think we're heading toward, because we're not going to have the normal as we remember it. There's going to be adaptations. Although I will say, I've looked in my crystal ball and I do have a prediction that once we have a vaccine and once it's widely distributed and everything, I do believe we're going to have, even if it's brief, a really big explosion of socializing. I think people are going to be so hot to try to get out there to see a concert, see a show, interact, hug, mingle, whatever. We're gonna see a period of really intense extroversion, even for introverts. You know, who knows how long it will last, but I'm just guessing because the psychological restrictions of not being able to get out there and hug people, for goodness sake. You know, that's really telling. I think it's cute that we're bumping elbows, you know, and I'm kind of like, well, if this is the only physical contact I get, I better have it, you know, but someday I hope to laugh about it, maybe ruefully.
I
But
did get to touch Maddie's feet yesterday. I saw her at Twin Spirits, and I was like, oh, I want to hug you so hard, like I miss you. And then she was like, touch my foot, and I was like, okay.
well, yeah, no, that was creative. I actually got myself into 2 handshakes over the last 2 days before either me or the other person realized we're not supposed to do this.
Yes.
And you know, these are really deeply ingrained things here that we have to be saying, like, no, it's not really human nature because we're very social animals. Even those of us who don't think they're all that social, they still have some social needs,
Right.
you know, because that's just how we're made.
Well, what should we look at next?
Well, I think you might as well go to the website because
Okay.
we've looked at all that I've got on the Instagram. And if you go to Gods, yeah, pop up the Dionysus one because this way people will be able to see it's, yeah, second from the right. This way people will be able to see some of the details that aren't visible in the other. By the way, I do it much more artistically now, but I'm a big believer in watermarking. So you notice I've got the name of the piece, the copyright, and my website, which contains my name. I'm really big on this because my really famous image, which we can look at in a minute, Melik Tauf's The Peacock Angel, people were making scans of my postcard of that and putting them online and using them in all kinds of situations without attributing me for years before I had a website or anything like that on my own. I realized, it's very easy for people's artwork to get appropriated in situations where people lose track of who made it, what it's called. And I'm kind of like, well, nowadays I do watermarks a little more artistically. I try to blend the letters that identify it, give them special effects and things so they look a little bit more like the composition. But I think they're, for web images that are, your official web images of your artwork, I think watermarks are a really good idea. You at least have to have some indication of who it is that made this. I'm just really big on that. So in this particular image, yeah, the god is in the center and beckoning you, and the votary is kind of where his navel is. And I didn't realize this until after I did the painting, but he's sort of like a substitute phallus there in the middle. And believe me, I didn't even think about that when I was planning the composition. It just occurred to me long after the fact. And then below that is the holy actor who's wearing the mask, the god with the horns is one of his names. So you can see kind of like that, the idea of the witch's god, it appears in multiple different cultures and connections. Dionysus and Cernunnos and Shiva and so forth. Yeah, the resolution's not enough to really see too much of that, but you can see it's the holy actor actually wearing the face of the god. So it's like a reference to how in theater, the person is not just impersonating, but is also, I guess today we would say channeling, is not just making a reference to the god, but is actually personifying him, and then in the background of it, there's this sort of orgiastic ritual scene, and there's all these masks and things that are piled at the bottom. This is, to be honest, one of my favorite paintings that I've ever done. And it has a special meaning for me because I did it in 1997, which was kind of the climax of the ecstatic ritual scene for the pagans here. Because once upon a time, before the internet and so forth, the only way that local witches and pagans and stuff had to know about each other, apart from going to metaphysical stores and making connections with groups for studying and things like that, was they here in this metro, because we had some really amazing ritualists putting on big rituals at the cross quarters. So what that is, by the way, is a reference to the Celtic wheel of the year. So you've got the solstices and you've got the equinoxes, and then you have the dates that are called cross quarters, which are between the solstices and the equinoxes. So it would start out as Samhain, which we know as Halloween, and that's both the end and the beginning of the year. So that's when the veils grow thin. Has a lot to do with ancestors and the other world and so forth. The next cross quarter would be Emelk, which is around February 1st. And that is the return of the light of the sun, the holiday of the goddess Bridget. Even though here in Minnesota, it's solid winter, really, in February, it is technically the beginning of the start of spring. The next cross-quarter date is Beltane, or May Day, which is technically the beginning of summer. And we're more familiar with that, especially in Minneapolis, because for years we've had this amazing May Day parade and ceremony sponsored by the Heart of the Beast. So yeah, let's see. And I was going to mention this earlier in the program. The third cross-quarter date is Lammas, or Lughnasadh, which means the festival of the first harvest, which we just passed, because that's July 31st or August 1st. So I find it, it's kind of an interesting coincidence that you're interviewing an artist that's got all this pagan influences, and it just happens that we're doing it so close to a major pagan holiday, Lammas or Lughnasadh, which again would be Green Man, harvest phase. So yeah, it all works out. Coincidences.
And I like that was the painting that like made me want to know you. The Green Man.
Let's go back. Well, actually, that particular one is not in this website because this website hasn't been updated for years. So if you want to go back to that one, we'll have to go back to the Instagram.
That's okay. Show me some other stuff.
All right. Well, these particular ones are all gods. Let's go to fairies and angels. That's at the far left.
There we go.
Yeah. Okay. So first one, do the topmost left. Remember when I was talking about the fairy Madonna and the female painted angel? Well, that's the same person. This is my friend Brenda, who is modeling for the fairy in this one. This is actually a painting that she commissioned. So I worked on it while I was living in Portland. So we've done this, a few years ago. I just wanted to show this because she's been a model for me several times.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right, let's go back to the menu for that one again. And click on the peacock angel again. That would be, yeah, the one in the center on the top. This is that painting I was referring to that's so famous. The peacock angel, Melik Taus, is the patron of the Yazidi, who are formerly of Syria. They have been forced on a diaspora by the Muslim neighbors. And in fact, it's amazing to me. In 2013, they were making front page world news. It's some form of ethnic cleansing. Anyway, how I was exposed to Melik Taus is that my ex-lover, the one in that relationship I referred to years before, was telling me about being initiated into the Anderson fairy witchcraft tradition. So it's Anderson and then fairy spelled F-E-R-I, witchcraft tradition. And talking about how he'd seen the blue god, Melik Taus, surrounded by rainbows at his initiation. So Victor Anderson is kind of like one of the founders and formers of this. He did what we would probably, well, I don't know. I mean, I've actually heard some other things, but he brought Melik Taus, the peacock angel, into this tradition. And I knew when I heard about this being that it was as if a light had turned on, because in the images of sacred masculinity were not very diverse 25 plus years ago. The emphasis back then was very much on the goddess. So there wasn't that much diversity in how the god was being represented. I knew when I heard of him that, a light went on. I said, this is somebody I need to know better. So one of the things about this image, it took 2 years to get to the final image. First of all, I did all the researching I possibly could on what little scraps of information there was out there about the Yazidi, and they were not really written by Yazidi. It was written by people who were commenting on their culture from an outside perspective that didn't know all that much. But I was trying to find out what was written about the peacock angel. The other two things that clicked this thing into being were, first, I started a pen pal relationship with a person, a white wand holder is what they call people who are artists in the initiatory fairy tradition, who she couldn't give me initiatory secrets, but she gave me enough information to go on. It was a poem, a bit of a song, a couple of references to Melik Taus as being part of the divine twins, which is another fairy image I've interpreted elsewhere. And then I met the person who became the model. His name was Callie Wolf, and he was the only male member of a group called the Psychic Sluts of Divine Retaliation. They were this punk anarchist group that performed a cappella stuff. And when I watched him perform, I was like watching him move. He had a very serpentine movement, and I said, that's it, he's got to be the model for this. But because I didn't have any precedent to go on, this was all done by intuition. So I had him do 2 sets of photographs where I was having him pose on all kinds of ways, just all sorts of poses. We tried out all kinds of different things. And I wound up putting together the composition that created this image where it's the forearms, the lotus position and the mudra with the lower hands. It was purely intuitive because, I did not have a model in what the way that Malak's house is represented in the few writings that were there is a boy with peacock feather wings, or a peacock's tail, actually. The peacock feather wings are an innovation that I put in there, or as just a peacock. But I wanted to work with the sort of humanoid version. So I wanted to do an angel and kind of like that sense of an angel with wings. I had seen a couple of beings that had peacock feather wings before. So I was like, okay, the peacock feather wings. And I put together the composition. So this was before the days of Photoshop even. So it's like literally cutting apart some photographs and then pasting them together. So the thing where he's holding up the double-headed torch combined with the other image, that was purely intuitive. But the landscape, so like the star that's between the two wings is meant to be an interpretation of Venus as either the morning star or the evening star. So it's a little bit of a reference to Lucifer, the morning star. And the dawn or sunset background is also a reference to that place of in between with all these rich colors and so forth. So yeah, and everything else, like the serpents that are on his arms, that actually came about partly because of the idea of Kundalini, the serpent energy rising, but also because the model had serpent tattoos on. And so the detail on this, because this is not high res enough to really blow it up, but he's wearing skull earrings, but he's got the flowers around his neck. So it's also that idea of life and death. Yeah, these are only at 72 DPI, so there's not enough resolution to blow this up too much further and get those details in there.
Well, I mean, if you're saying that people are taking this image, then you probably don't want to put like really nice ones up regardless.
Oh, yeah, because you do want to give people an incentive to buy the prints and things. And the thing of it is though, like I was saying, before I had this website, before I had my own images to put up, people were taking postcards that they bought from metaphysical stores that I'd stopped in and scanning the postcards, and the original set of postcards had a typo because his name in English, Melek, means angel, and Taus means peacock or peafowl. And in the original postcard, that apostrophe was not after the A, it was after the T. It was a typo, and I could tell very easily, because they would have the original typo preserved. One of the things I find so amazing about this image is how many people out there have heard of Malak's house or respond to the image. Either they come into a store and they're just drawn into the image as a unique, I don't know, angelic, godly image, or they have some other connection because this guy used to be so arcane and so esoteric. It was a struggle for me back in 1994 to find out, the information, what little information I could, but creating this image has been like a door. I mean, it's been a door for me into many different kinds of situations and meetings that I probably wouldn't have had otherwise. And it's also been a tremendous influence. So I, several years ago, created an essay that explained how the image came to be, like all the details, that went into it, that I've just kind of gone over quickly. What I've been planning, and a lot of it has to do with trying to figure out how I'm going to do this, is creating a companion essay that talks about the effect that it's had in the world. Because there's been people who've written essays, as if this was a Yazidi image instead of, an artist's interpretation of a Yazidi image. There's been other images of Malak's house that have been inspired by mine. So they replicate certain elements like the forearms or the double-headed torch, or some version of either being cross-legged or kneeling or whatever, and this is really amazing to me. This is the one image that I've done where I could say I created something that was so original, it appears to have had a ripple effect. And I want to put all of that together into a sort of a second gloss on the subject. But that's really difficult because basically what it's doing is cataloging subjective impressions and so forth. So I've collected a dossier of things, but it's been kind of challenging, you know, and of course I've had all kinds of other things to do in the meantime. So that's sort of taken a back burner, but one of these days I'm intending on doing that. So yeah, let's go back to some of the gallery things. My God.
I wanted to add, just for the people that are still watching, just out of my own curiosity, when Paul and I were talking about this image, like I went and Googled it myself, and like they're all Paul's artwork.
Well,
But
not
like
entirely,
well,
but
I'm just saying that, and then people have tried to do what they can with it, as well as like people make Pinterest boards about this piece of artwork. Like this goes very, very far and deep. And there are now other pieces of artwork that exist that were kind of like inspired by
yeah,
your
yeah. And
work.
I've been keeping examples of those wherever I can find them. So, you know, might as well go to like Fantasia. I think that's the third category.
Fantasia. And then why don't we make this the last one, because we're about to
Yeah.
hit.
Oh, definitely. We've gone on 2 hours, which is just amazing. So,
It's easy to talk to, Paul. I'm sorry that this lighting is so bad. I was
oh, I don't worry about it.
doing the best.
Hey, why don't you go down to the little green figure that's on the last row on the left? Because remember when I was talking to you before we started the interview about payment plans and such? This is the painting that I sold to a person whom I've never met. And what's interesting about this painting from a technical point of view is that, okay, so a lot of times the inspiration for a painting will come from a dream. That's rarest. I'll have like a mystic dream and I have to turn it into some kind of a painting. More often it's kind of like I decide to do a practice of engagement with a certain divinity. So I'm kind of like consciously and stream of consciousnessly figuring out a way to interpret them. Sometimes it's a matter of I get elements from the outer world, like different images. Like when we were on that core image, I was saying that what it sparked it was the intense expression on the face of the model. But the body of the model, the body of the model was doing something different. So I created a totally different body in a totally different context, but it inspired this way of going into it. But the way this painting was done was through a frottage, which means you just basically throw a bunch of paint down on it and you tease out an image from what the paint splotches and whatever did. This has actually been my most successful painting doing that. And in addition to my first, which I find interesting. So yeah, I threw down all this paint that was yellow and green and red and I think a little blue. And I just saw the face and the hands, you know, so I teased them out and basically it turned into an image that I called a gremlin, but I was thinking of it as sort of like an earth elemental. It looks like this creature that's sort of, you know, in a fugue state, like deeply enmeshed in playing with these currents of earth energies. So I sort of see that thing that's near the head on the upper left as being kind of like root-like, and some of these abstract shapes feel kind of plant-like to me. You know, none of them has been drawn out to the point where you would like say, why, yes, that's a root, or why, yes, that's a flower. It's just, they're just sort of hinted, because this is one of those things where I'm kind of like softening the urge to representation to try to just kind of get at the emotion that building up the abstraction can do. So that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is, oh no, I was agreeing, as in, this is, it's weird. Like you go through all of your artwork that you have, like if I just kind of flip back and forth.
Yeah.
Like you have so much life in what is in each piece. And then like to come to that one, whoops, this one is way more abstract. So when you say that you just approached it completely different, I mean, like you can tell, you can totally see it in there.
Well, actually, you know, since we're at it, I could show you another frottage piece if you go back to the Fantasia gallery. The one that's at the top left, I call that one, yeah, that one. I call that one Ace of Wands. And this is another one that's almost totally abstract. You know, you can kind of feel that there's a little bit of a flower shape in that bud and maybe up in the center top. But for the most part, it's really just, you know, streams of color, kind of feeling like force and movement, you know.
You know, Paul, I didn't ask you, are all of these acrylic?
Most of them. I have not really done oils in years and years. I have worked with other water-based media like watercolor and so forth, but almost all of the paintings that you're seeing are acrylic. I switched to acrylic when I was about 18 because basically traditional oil paints take so long to dry, and whatever is floating in the air, like cat hairs or whatever, will just fall on it, and you know, they'll get stuck, and that's really hard. You have to pick out cat hairs with pins, you know. And so the thing with acrylic, and this is worth mentioning just in terms of the acrylic, you notice how very bright the colors are. Part of that is because I use a lot of colors straight from the tube. I evolved a technique with acrylic because acrylic's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. It dries so fast.
Right.
And
Right.
so the thing is, it's difficult to mix up a lot of custom colors, particularly if you're trying to do something, uh, you know, where you're going to want to use it repeatedly. I mean, it's tough. I'm not bad at it. But, you know, back when we were talking about project logs, when I have a session, sometimes I like to write down what colors I was working with, because that allows me to go back at a later session or in another painting and replicate the same pattern of colors or the same mix of colors. You know, it's particularly important in acrylic because if you mix up a bunch of colors, it's harder to keep that mix. You know, you have to kind of have an idea of how you created it. So one of the things that I have done with my technique is I use a lot of pure colors straight out of the tube or the bottle next to each other. Now, and this is not a bad example. If you look down at the, for example, the bees that are down underneath the arm of the figure that's got the wand, you could see some blue kind of shimmerings and stuff. Well, I use a lot of colors straight out of the tube in juxtapositions, or okay, the stars that are in the fairy's outfit. So she's got like these girdles that are holding her dress made out of energy together. So they look from a distance as if they're like a particular color, but they aren't actually. What they are is several different pure colors that are layered on top of each other, but slightly irregularly, because what happens, this is where some of this vibrance effect comes from. What happens is at a certain distance, your eye, your brain actually does the mixing. It's like the same thing that Georges Seurat used when he was doing his pointillistic paintings, you know, Afternoon on the Grand Champ. He used pure colors next to each other, but he didn't actually blend. And so the effect that happens when you get that is that your eye takes in the visual information and your brain does the mixing. So it creates this vibrant effect that is in some ways more intense than you would get if you had like, it's more iridescent. So you look at the flame on the top of the female fairy's head, you know, you get a sort of an iridescent effect going on there. That's because there's so many pure colors that are arranged next to each other, but not necessarily in a chromatic way. You know, like they teach you, you know, about color wheel theory, you know, so you can have complementary and split complementary and things like that. Well, I discovered, I started doing this intuitively, you know, with colors that weren't in any specific chromatic relationship. And what I found that does is creates a kind of a eye-brain interaction that's like the effect of iridescence in nature. You know, it's even more so when you're in front of an original painting. And by the way, because that kind of an effect is hard, very hard to replicate in its entirety in a reproduction, that's one of the selling points of an original. You'll have an experience with original that you cannot get anything but an approximation of with a reproduction. People who buy fine art originals, collectors, that they're sensible to that. You know, they know that the difference between an original painting and a reproduction of it, that the painting has life because there's all these different layers of paint and light is actually shining through them, going all the way down to the white canvas underneath and then bouncing back through all those different layers at different staggered intervals. You know, you don't have that in a reproduction or even something like this. I mean, we are looking at light, but we're looking at, in a sense, a flat mosaic of light. And if you're looking at, you know, a print reproduction, you're looking at a flat layer of pigment particles that are arranged, you know, so it gives you a really good idea of what the image is. But some of the special magic of an original comes from not just, you know, the mana, the energy from the artist putting into it, but on a pure physics level, it comes from the way light enters into the medium on the support, which is the technical term for the canvas or the paper or whatever you put it on, and then bounces back off of it. So there are things that you can get from an interaction with the original that can really only be hinted at in reproductions. I think that's important to say because there's some folks out there who aren't aware of that. They think that a print or a repro, even a giclée, which is the highest end reproduction that I'm aware of, is as good as an original. And I'm like, I'm here to say, no, not quite. There's an element apart from its uniqueness that's just a pure physics thing having to do with subject-object viewer relationship with the work that an original will have that you can't get from anything that's reproduced from it.
Even just looking at this one, Paul, like I mean, like I'm seeing it on my tablet right now, but like I push my chair back and it has a completely different look than what it is. And I realize that like even looking at it through a screen is going to have like everything you're saying. And I agree with you completely. Like,
Well,
when you talk about what?
Brenda owns this painting, and you know, I don't know. I seem to remember. Do you not have like, what would you call it? Maturity dates or something like the work that's submitted to Gods and Monsters and Unicorns. It needs to be completed like within 2 years of the show, right?
Yeah, we do that just because that we were getting a lot of people that were resubmitting the same artwork over and over again. And then we can hear it in the crowd from people being like, I've seen this.
Well, this one has never been on public exhibition in a show. And I'm kind of like, you know, if you were open, I could probably see if Brenda would allow it to be exhibited at like a unicorn show or something like that. I mean, that's something we should probably look into another time, but it's this, you wouldn't have that problem with this because it was done as a private commission. So it hasn't had that level of exposure. Yeah, okay, cool.
Well, okay, since we sorry for the technical difficulties and everything. This has been a night. But the last question I always ask everybody is other artists, how do you want to be contacted by them? Like during this pandemic right now?
Well, right now, if you're able to friend me on Facebook, that's good. My email, Paul Rucker Art, PaulRuckerArt @gmail.com is also the best way. I do have like a contact me link on my website, but it actually goes to that same mailbox. I've been having some issues with some of the mail going to spam though. So like recently I had a person inquire about original art and she had to message me on Facebook because we were already friended there and I had to hunt and find her email. So, you know, I gotta say Facebook is actually a good backup. These two forms of communication are best. Until my website is formally redone though, it's not really going to be the best way to contact me. So yeah, Facebook or email probably.
And you don't mind when other artists reach out to you with questions, do you?
Oh no, no. If people,
I myself have asked you lots of questions.
oh yeah, yeah. And if, some people watching this cast have some questions on some of the things I've asked, yeah, they can go ahead and message me. Um, I'm starting up a new job as of like next week. So, might take a little longer to get back with answers, but, yeah, I mean, I'd be fine with that.
Okay. Well, I had a little issue with my internet today. So, Paul, I really owe you a second episode.
Oh,
I'm so
I don't,
sorry. But thank you so much for sharing and putting all this together, and like all of your information is so helpful. And like I'm writing notes myself because like you're inspiring me to like think about some things in a different way, and I really appreciate it, especially right now during the pandemic.
well, hopefully the next time we do this, I'll have a chance to show those funny collage paintings.
Yes.
I've just like, it's so funny. I didn't realize that the time would go by this fast. I was like, oh my God, can I come up with enough content for this and this and this? Because you've asked so many good questions. It's just, yeah. Well, I'll be looking forward to doing this again,
Yes.
or more times too, because I think it would be kind of nice to focus on particular things. I saw this first episode. It's just like a, hello, this is me,
Yes.
have an overview.
This is all I want to do. And I'm still trying to reach out to some people. I asked people if they could like volunteer, but I think that I need to just go out and ask to see if people are around.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of did that with me and that
Yeah.
worked out. Yeah.
And I just like everybody's in different places right now during this pandemic. I'm in a different place than I really want to be. And it's like, I don't want to add another stress.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, here in Minneapolis, our neighborhood in particular, one of the stressors we're dealing with is the dramatic uptick in crime. And
Yeah.
I'm going to go into that subject, but there's been some serious stuff going on right near where I live. So that's another stressor, on top of pandemic and economic issues and all that good stuff. But actually, this has been a great diversion.
Okay. That's actually really good to hear. That's good to
Yeah,
hear. So, but I hope you have a wonderful night.
thank you. You too.
And I'm going to
Thank you
stop
for this.
sharing. And
Yeah,
then
thank you for the opportunity.
here's another coming behind me. Oh, okay.
I love all these naturalistic lifelike details that keep coming into this.
This has been there was children screaming and I was trying to close windows and I was like, what is going on right now? Paul just got the worst day.
Oh, I know. Well, whatever. We still got some stuff going on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Have a lovely evening. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, you too.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.